I took that moment as it was my duty to build and strengthen a relationship that was that constant in our country. Like one thing we have to understand, we all share this land collectively, and we all inherited a history together. Nobody today on this land created the residential schools. Nobody today on this land created the Indian Act or the 60s school policy. We all inherited this moment. And I took it as my duty in this country as a First Nation person and a proud Canadian that let's make this moment to strengthen our relationship. And I had to really dig deep and to stay calm because my message is I was thinking of a residential school survivor that was sitting on her couch that would be watching the news, and I didn't want to trigger her. I didn't want to trigger him. And I kept that calmness. I wanted to show what reconciliation looked like as an example. And then I started to really speak to Canadians in a way that, listen, maybe you weren't educated enough to understand what truth means. Baby boomers, they weren't taught the truth in elementary and secondary in this country.
Last October, I was getting ready to board a flight from Toronto back to Regina, and it was the last week in October, right in the middle of the Toronto Blue Jays World Series run. It was game 5, I think, where Snyder hit a home run to start the game. Those of you know it, and then the next batter was it Vladi hit one. So everyone there is watching the game on their phones as we're waiting to board, and Cadmus Delorme was right in front of me, and I recognized him right away. He's, for most Canadians, a pretty notable person. And of course, he was like everybody else, just super into it, excited and cheering. But also at the same time, he couldn't help but notice all the people around him, many people who he wasn't traveling with. I'm not sure why he was there. I'm sure it was something to do with either One Hoop, his business, or the University of Regina. But at any rate, just the number of people who interacted with him and were just excited to say hello to him or talk to them. And I could tell there were people talking to him. He didn't necessarily know who these people were, but he was just gracious with everybody and just made everybody feel very, very welcome and very at home. And I can tell you, after spending an hour with him in this podcast, like, that's exactly how I felt after spending time with him. This is such a personable human being who's taken what is a really delicate and challenging issue and conversation and made it accessible. And I think that's what so the first time that I saw him on television was during the discovery of the unmarked graves on his reservation. And just the way he went about this from the get-go was very impressive. I'm at that age too, where everybody looks like they're in their 20s or 30s, and he's in his 40s, but he looks very, very young. And I mean, he was at the time pretty young chief. But his leadership is just outstanding. So this was a real treat of a conversation. I think of as being one of the most influential people I've ever had on the show, and certainly one of the most impressive in so many ways. So if you've not had a chance to hear his story and learn about his approach to not just truth and reconciliation, but lots of issues, just leadership in general, this is a great episode. So I'm very excited to allow you to join me in spending an hour with Cadmus Delorme. My first question is, because I don't actually know what I've never met a chancellor. I don't know what a chancellor does. So what does a chancellor do?
Thank you for the opportunity to join your podcast. The chancellor is a ceremonial role in most parts. You are the chair of the Senate. The University of Regina, I was appointed by the Senate as the 10th chancellor of the University of Regina in July of 2025. In order to understand a chancellor, you got to understand the governance framework. So universities are governed by provincial territorial acts from the government. And so the University of Regina Act appoints a board, but also has a Senate. And the chancellor chairs the Senate, chooses the chancellor role. And so what chancellor does is you chair the Senate, which approve a lot of the academic final decisions, programs, so forth, names, accreditations. You also chair the appeals committee. So the academic appeals committee, you're the final and binding committee through the process and good governance. There's a few other committees that you chair as well. You also get a seat on the board of governors, and you lead both graduations, fall and spring. And you just attend a lot of events as
Great.
a dignitary of the University of Regina.
Like you have a lot of other sort of irons in the fire, if you will, in terms of things you do. So how much is it like? How would you describe as full time, part time, half to like? How much time would you say that takes?
Yeah, you get about 5 to 10 emails a week. You could do it from your admin time. During graduation, you definitely need it for 6 to 8 hours for 2 to 3 days. Senate meetings are half a day. Give or take, average out, like probably 2 hours a week. Some
Okay,
weeks, they don't need much. That's not including the events you get invited
sure.
to. Events in Regina, usually the president and the chancellor get invited to events in Regina. So average 2 hours a week.
So I remember the first time, of course, you came into many of our radars, if you will, was obviously during the time of the discovering of the unmarked graves in your area. And so as I'm seeing you as they go to this story, and then I see this really, there's this idea of the chief has to be somebody old, right? Has to be somebody who's been around a long time and seen a lot of things. Not that you have maybe seen a lot of things, but like you did, it was shocking to see somebody that young in your role. And when you think back of like how that happened, like how you got to that position as quickly as you did, obviously maybe younger than most, what do you think prepared you that you maybe didn't recognize at the time, but you look back and say that was really important for me to be able to take on this level of responsibility and authority?
Mhm. I was an elected First Nation chief from the age of 33 to 41. I was a chief for 7 years. Absolutely love my journey. Today, in education wise, just to show my academic on my credentials, I got a master's in public policy, public administration from the Johnson Shiama School of Public Policy. I got an undergraduate degree in business administration from the First Nations University of Canada, a college at the University of Regina. I got an ICD designation from the Institute of Corporate Directors out of the Rotman University, which is a partnership with the Levine School of Levine at the University of Regina. So this education really prepared me for the tools mentally and to understand just what needed to be done as a leader. Growing up in my First Nation, I had a very good kitchen table on my First Nation. Both my parents residential school survivors, but raised a dreamer and really prepared me to just you work with people. You can disagree with people and still work with them. And that really taught me a lot growing up. I excelled in a sport called golf in my late teens, early 20s, won the provincial championship, really tried to excel my golf game. And so golf really taught me a lot about leadership as well. And so to be a young chief, definitely the youngest person in the room a lot of the times, I had to prove myself, I had to set the tone, but I did it with grace. I didn't do it with rushing anything. And yeah, a lot of people got to remember me during my time as chief during those 7 years.
I didn't realize there was this golf connection. So you and I are like, we're kindred already. We'll talk about that. We'll table that one, but we're going to talk more about golf now
Yep.
that I know that. Was there, okay, you have these parents who are obviously nurturing you and leading you in a particular direction. Did you feel, even at an early age, that you were going to probably take on some significant roles in that thing? There was an aspiration early on to lead and have a big place in this world.
I did. It
Yeah.
was the people and the mentorships, the teachers, the elders, the senior citizens, the my friends that really brought the best out in me. I grew up a teenager born in 82 in this province of Saskatchewan, the last generation to grow up without technology. I didn't know what a cell phone was till I was 21 years old. And it really allowed me to just connect with people. Growing up in the rural area really helped a lot too. You got to really understand what boredom was in a good way, in a healthy way, and you just went outside and did what you had to do to just stay entertained. I grew up in small First Nation, but also with small towns locally. So understanding the non-First Nation perspective, I always had that respect. I went to Prairie Valley School Division from grade 1 to grade 6. So I got to understand that. And I took the on-reserve schooling from grade 7 to grade 12. And so I always knew leadership was a part of me. I was the SRC president in high school. I became the university student president in university. And I was what I considered a 60-watt light bulb in a 100-watt box when it came to education. But where I shined was the attitude and how to just bring people together.
Yeah.
And it was through tone of your voice. It was through being open-mindedness. It was respecting other people's opinions. It was making decisions in real moments of truth and just leading with heart. And I knew I was destined to be where I am today. And I'm 43 right now and still have a lot to learn. And I still bring that same perspective as I was 14-year-old Cadmus. Just listen to people. My mom always taught me you got two best friends and one worst enemy on you at all times. So make sure you use your best friends as much as your worst enemy.
And it's so interesting when I mean, I have just a small experience in my days here in Prairie South, here in Moose Jaw, where I worked at the central office. So I had the role of First Nations and Métis education for about, I don't know, it was like about 6 months. It wasn't a long time, but in that little short time, interim time, attending a few of the meetings, like there was this clear message from our First Nations people that getting to know people at a relational level is the top priority. You start with that. So you don't dive into meeting agenda minutes until you've had a chance to ask somebody about their family and talk about those kind of things. So I mean, there was just culturally, which was very different from people like, all right, let's get to it. Let's get to the business of it too. Like you talk about leading, you said showing your heart before you ask for their hand. And like, there's a lot of things that has to get done in your role. All those things there's a level of bureaucracy. There's a level of duties and things to get done. And so sometimes the heart doesn't seem to have a place in those kind of environments. So how do you ensure that you have that balance of putting that in place? And listen, we live in a world today where politics lacks a lot of heart, but just doesn't have that. So I don't know how you navigated that, especially early on, and even as you're continuing your journey in that.
Absolutely. A lot of the things I find today is mental health is foundational. It doesn't matter who you are, your age, your background, your beliefs, your marriage, couples, who you want to be in this world. Mental health is foundational. And unfortunately, many of us, it's tough to talk about. I always say we have three layers on us. You have that outer layer that you got to show everybody. As soon as you're in public, you got to smile. Doesn't matter what's going on in your brain and your heart. That second layer, only your immediate family sees, your closest people. And then you got that third layer, only the mirror in the car sees it and the bathroom mirror sees it. And so you got to make sure all three layers are somewhat the same. If they're not, then it's really tough to get through a day. And what I really find in leadership is I watch people. I don't stare, I don't be disrespectful, but I got to watch a room before I start speaking just to make sure I understand where people are at. And then it's tone setting too. And if you're the leader in the room, your tone of your voice really sets a tone. And you got to start a meeting, you got to, whatever you're in. And what I mean by showing your heart before you ask for their hand is we got a duty to do. And the thing is, if you can throw out a little joke, because we all smile in the same language and it has to be a helium style joke where it lifts everybody up, those moments, those are the precious moments in meetings where you can just all share. And you don't necessarily have to be funny, but you have to say something to just lift the tension, get people on the same flow. And that's one thing I'm really good at. And I get pushed to a lot of chair positions, I think, because of my style of just understanding. But it comes down to mental health. We all have a duty, we all have to get to an end goal. But you just got to understand not everybody's the same in the room. Everybody's a different. You got your extroverts, your introverts, you got your ones that need their opinion said right away. You got the ones that are in there with just because of past meetings or certain situations coming in maybe a little more negative, just not seeing the glass half full. And you got the glass half full people in the room. So you don't assume everybody's the same, but everybody has to focus on you. And that's where I really find it takes a really good leader to just get a meeting from beginning to end or a plan from beginning to end to get to fruition. So everybody knows why they were participating at that moment.
You have any examples of that? I always think it's because you're speaking that from experience of something that where, okay, we had a little bit of diversity is great, but diversity also means they're not all the same. And
Yeah.
so you're trying to bind them together in some way. So I don't know if you've got an example that comes to mind of a time where, again, you don't have to get into the specifics, but like where, all right, I realized, that not everybody's on the same page here, or there's some discomfort, whatever that is. And so how do I bring people to a place where we can actually accomplish something together, despite the fact that we might not all be the same?
Mhm. Yeah, I'll bring an education example. And when I was a chief, we talked about internally. So in First Nation governance, and in Saskatchewan, there's First Nation and there's Métis. So we say Indigenous, but we just got to understand there are First Nation cultures, which is within that there's five, and then there's Métis. And so where I grew up in Cows is we are background of Cree and Soto. So in Cows is when I was chief, I understood we worked in silos. And so I brought to my council, because I was elected with 8 people. I was the chief and spokespeople. The council were the decision makers. And I said, we got to collaborate with our local non-First Nation schools, Broadview and so forth, Grenfell. And at first, I had a couple people in the room that said, no, we don't do that. That's colonization. That's breaching our treaty to education. I'm like, but they have things we need and we have things they need. And we know education resources is dwindling in the in the rural areas because of just economies of scale. So without really getting the council's approval yet, I took the director of education. We went to Broadview and said, hey, listen, we got this huge industrial arts room in our school in Cowes. We need science. Is there a way we can have a reciprocal relationship here? And so the principal came out to Cowes. We had some meetings. She come and met council. And so where I'm going with this, to sum it up, because we're on a podcast, I don't want to get too much into details, is we showed tangible understandings. And if you don't bring people in the room, like a principal of the school, into the council chambers, you get your subconscious mind to create a character without actually talking to someone. But once you get someone in the room and you let them speak, your conscious mind starts to take over and you start to realize that there is a relationship needed here and is not a breach. It's about actually uniting in relationship. And that's how I really enjoy taking ideas in rooms to bringing it to fruition, is by making it more personal, making it about people that are in the room, and also understanding that we both want higher education for all of our kids.
I mean, yeah, and you're continuing to build on this theme of connecting, showing the heart kind of idea. And again, this is why I wanted to talk to you, because there's so many lessons here to be learned. But again, if I go back to that very first time that I was introduced to you, and I don't, what year are we talking about? This was post-COVID, right? The unmarked graves discovery,
That's right, 2021. Yes.
2021. So there you are, and again, I'm picturing you're walking where the graves were, and you're being interviewed along that way. And just the way taking this horrific discovery and you just really lending your kind of calm to the whole thing, and not just to your community, but like to the rest of us, that like, how do we process this thing? This is, a very challenging kind of idea to comprehend and process in whatever way. And yet you have your own grief that is probably not probably was way more than mine was, because you're there. These are your people. This is family. This is deep part of who you are. So I just wonder how you do that, where you elevate yourself to say, I have to bring this to people's attention and help them understand this to a certain degree in a way that they can process this without, but yet dealing with your own grief during that time, which is going to be, I can only imagine, as painful as it was.
Yes. I took that moment as it was my duty to build and strengthen a relationship that was that constant in our country. Like, one thing we have to understand, we all share this land collectively, and we all inherited a history together. Nobody today on this land created the residential schools. Nobody today on this land created the Indian Act or the 60s school policy. We all inherited this moment. And I took it as my duty in this country, as a First Nation person and a proud Canadian, that let's make this moment to strengthen our relationship. And I had to really dig deep and to stay calm because my message is I was thinking of a residential school survivor that was sitting on her couch that would be watching the news, and I didn't want to trigger her. I didn't want to trigger him. And I kept that calmness. I wanted to show what reconciliation looked like as an example. And then I started to really speak to Canadians in a way that, listen, maybe you weren't educated enough to understand what truth means. Baby boomers, they weren't taught the truth in elementary and secondary in this country in the 50s, 60s. Generation X was not taught the truth in our education system in the 60s, 70s in elementary and secondary. Generation Y wasn't taught the truth. Millennials were taught the truth. Generation Now were taught the truth. I had to pick my audience and who I was talking to as well. And I would tell a baby boomer or Generation X or Y, listen, like just keep a little room between your ears to help rewire what the truth really is. And to First Nations people that were listening, I kept my message at a tone that, listen, we have reconciliation to do on our part as well here. And so let's just make sure we look at our neighbor, look at each other and say, hey, listen, let's educate each other about the truth. Then reconciliation comes with so much more open-mindedness and optimism.
It was getting as that thing as my wife and I argue if I'm a boomer or Gen X. I don't know what I am. Anyway, but to your point, it's just wild that none of this stuff was part of my education. And I'm trying to do this as not only an adult, but also a person in education. And I would say that, which kind of leads me to my next question, but like I would say that early on, as a province said, okay, we have to figure this out. We have to do a better job of educating our young people. There was an element, first of all, of checking a box. Okay, we did that. Like we taught this thing and that's all it was. This is sort of pre-Murray Sinclair and Truth and Reconciliation as we know it now. But I guess I wonder for those sort of non-Indigenous leaders in our province or our country, like how can they continue to sort of grow on this? I feel like this is happening, but maybe you're identifying some things like we could do better in terms of the relationships that we have and trying to create this partnership and equity amongst each other. So what if you're talking to those particular folks, like what is it that we can do to continue moving forward in this way?
Understand that we have to understand that certain specific demographics we're facing right now. More First Nation live off the reserve than on the reserve today. Like that transition 12 years ago. Secondly, we got to understand that the relationship governments have with First Nations in Canada. So right now we have something called Section 9124, which Section 91 is federal responsibility. Any province or territory in Canada would say that First Nations are a federal responsibility. But yet, most First Nations live off the reserve now that are attending our schools. And so the provincial government right now, it's hard to transition to understand what role that the provinces play when it comes to First Nations. And so when students attend school divisions off the reserve, school divisions try their best to try and accommodate. In the South, it's a lower number percentage of First Nations. In the North, it's predominantly First Nations just because of demographics. And so school divisions are doing their part. But when it comes to the funding mental health because of what First Nations inherited in intergenerational trauma, to understanding curriculum, our curriculum, it's hard to shift curriculum. We're trying right now in the province of Saskatchewan, and I tell you, it is not easy trying to turn a ship from one direction to another. And so are we making Indigenous a part of every curriculum instead of just making certain students take Indigenous studies or Native studies? Like we have to make it normal as if we pretty much are raising a province with two understandings, a Canadian Saskatchewan and a First Nation Métis. And we have to teach everybody. So, to answer your question, and I'm starting to get long-winded because I'm a recovering politician, but you have to help the decision makers understand that First Nations and Métis are not just a shareholder in this province. We're not just one demographic. We're rights holders, just in as equal as how our Constitution, our Charter of Rights and Freedoms. And that's hard to shift right now because for a politician's main objective is to get reelected. First Nations and Métis sometimes are not a part of that foundational reelection part. So we only come up when it's qualitative, meaning orange shirts, the odd shift, but we have to transition to quantitative. And that's really going to help the social cart and economic horse in our province because education will enhance everything in our province. And I leave you with one last statistic. You take the province of Saskatchewan provincial budget right now, more than half of the provincial budget goes to social services and corrections. And I'm not here to try and make anybody feel guilty. I'm just giving you like what we inherited. Majority of those two in our provinces are filled with First Nations and Métis. How do we in one generation transition our budget from focusing on that to more education? Is we got to understand that First Nations are not a federal responsibility. The province plays a key role in the resources needing to enhance that part as well.
Yeah, there's certainly lots of work for us to do in sort of understanding that. And I don't know. Now, again, you maybe know the statistics better than I would, but this was probably 10 years ago. We were the idea that First Nations and Métis would make up over 50% of Saskatchewan's population. I don't know where we are now and whether that actually has come to be. Do you have any numbers on that?
I use Statistics Canada. So a couple of years ago, First Nations and Métis and Inuit, not too much Inuit, but there's a few Inuit in the province of Saskatchewan that live here. We were 22% of the province.
Yeah. And, but things have changed just in terms of immigration and all kinds of things that may be impacting that, but it certainly represents obviously, not just again, and not just in the numbers, but in terms of our culture. When you think about the trajectory of First Nations and Métis education specifically, you go back to your own, and you had this sort of sounds like a dual experience of being both part of a public school setting as well as an on reserve experience. I don't know if you can track thinking back to particularly your public school days to where we might be now. And would you point out a positive trajectory in the way we're doing things, or not that we're anywhere near where we want to be? I understand that, but I just wonder if you see some positive growth in that area and maybe what you might even attribute that to in any way.
Yeah, for sure. I want to share a few things that I experienced as a little kid. And I see a little kid as kid, grade 1 to grade 6 in Broadview. And please, I love all my teachers and principal at the time, but it was just a different generation at the time in decision making. But I was telling my daughter, she's 9 years old. I was like, I asked her the other day, do you know the anthem, like the Canadian anthem? And she's like, I think so. And I was like, man, from grade 1 to grade 6, we got marched in the gym 3 times a week to sing the Canadian anthem and then the Lord's Prayer. And I'm like, I enjoyed it. Today I can render both at just such a simple, because we all stood in the gym 3 times a week. And the reason I'm going there is I start to think about, I had a different experience growing up in an elementary school, in a public school. And I remember at recess time in grade 2. I'm going to tell you a quick story, and I'm going to have my answer to your question after this. Grade 2, soccer was everything at recess, everything. We would all run outside as soon as the bell would ring, put our shoes for the goalpost, and you already knew what team you were on. It was the Indians versus the white kids. It wasn't even, and it was just so fun. Like, we didn't even realize it. Like, it was just, you already knew what team you were on. And like, we would play till the bell rang, and there was no fights, but we played intense. Like, and then I think back today to my boy who's in grade 2. I'm like, you would never pick a team like that today. It was just so normal at the time when I was in grade 2. And so I remember in grade 4 in Broadview, and my home didn't speak my language. My parents, just because of their experience of residential school, We didn't speak the language. We didn't really do culture, but it's not like they were against it. We just didn't do it. Like my parents just both went to Catholic residential schools. And so, anyways, I remember they brought in a Cree teacher and I sat there and this lady come in and spoke Cree to us for 10 minutes straight. And I had no clue what she was saying. I just looking at her thinking, I think I should know this. And then she started to teach us Korean. That really impacted me in a good way. I'm like, I think that's who I am. And not to fast forward to today and, what your question was in this one is we've definitely enhanced. And I get the privilege of going to schools once in a while, especially speaking to teachers now. And then usually they ask me if I can speak to the students. What I feel is missing right now in 2026 is First Nations know their First Nations. Métis know their Métis. They don't know what it truly spiritually and that spirit in them. I'm not talking religious spiritual. I'm talking that spirit in them. What it means to hear someone actually speak the language, to hear a creation story, to understand what it means to be Cree, Soto, Dene. And I think that's where it's not the school's responsibility, but it's the school's obligation to start to bring in people to speak to that perspective. And I really feel an attachment even to the non-Indigenous listening to the other students, because you got to remember, you don't separate a First Nation Métis to go teach them who they are, because they want their non-Indigenous friend who they play with at recess, that they play on that hockey team, that they're on that hobby, whatever they're doing, to talk with them about it too. So you got to include both when you're teaching these moments.
Oh, that's so well said. Hey, just because I think about this a lot. So my work of late has been so much focused on artificial intelligence and all that stuff, and have been part of working with school divisions and communities where we talk about the Indigenous perspective on that and how there's lots of challenges and risks involved with using that. But think about the language specifically and language preservation. And it's not the same as I don't know how many Indigenous groups there are, but there's there's dozens and dozens of languages. So where would you say, just thinking about maybe Saskatchewan for now, where do First Nations tribes stand in terms of language preservation? And Cree seems to be one that has a little bit more traction than others in a lot of respects, but I don't know if that's a common thread amongst the community in terms of like, how are we going to make sure that our kids understand the language to the degree that they need to?
Yes. Language is foundational to culture. And I want to speak to what language actually does, then I'll explain the languages and how this works with education. So English and French are our two official Canadian languages in Canada. English and French, it talks about nouns and ownership. That's the tone of the language. In First Nation languages, it's about relationship. It's not about nouns and ownership. It's about relationship. It's about humor, but humor not to be funny, humor to bring cohesion to the moment, to bring that glue to the moment. And that's foundational to why, even as Canadians and non-Indigenous people, the more you learn Indigenous languages, the more you bring harmony to your own understanding and home. Because right now, today, we're very economically mindset, which is beautiful. I'm an economic mindset. But sometimes economic comes to capitalism in a certain perspective. We all want the nice things, that's which class you live in and so forth and stuff. But Indigenous languages bring you back to that nobody's better than anybody else. Like we all have a role, but it doesn't mean you have any better. You're not better than anybody. And so it's really important. I just want to say that because it's really important to talk about education and training the mindset. And I think that's going to be our winner in the country when we start to understand it. So in Saskatchewan, there's the Michif language. So I just want to mention that. And then there's the 5 First Nations that live in this province. You got Cree, but you got a couple dialects of Cree, but I'm going to keep it simple today. You got the Soto. So in Saskatchewan, we say Soto. In Canada, you say Ojibwe. Same thing. So Soto. You got the Lakota, which is only one nation in Saskatchewan. Wood Mountain is Lakota. You got Dakota, which is 3 nations in Saskatchewan. You got Whitecap. You got Standing Buffalo by Fort Capel, and you got Wahpeton up by, I think is by Prince Albert. And then you got Nakota, which is Assiniboine, which is a couple nations like Chega, King, Carry the Kettle. I just said that just so anybody listening, you could map it out really fast. And language preservation is really important. We got 2 of the best institutions in our province that we need to utilize more. The First Nations University of Canada and the Saskatchewan Indian Cultural Center in Saskatoon. And so First Nation youth today are not connected to the language as much as maybe the adults were. We're talking about a second generation on our land right now that have never grown up listening to the language. Right now, you get a 40-year-old plus First Nation person in our province. They woke up hearing the language in their house at some point by their grandma, by their uncle. But now anybody under 40 never heard the language in their home. So it really dwindled down. And so in one generation, we will probably may lose the spirit of certain languages, but AI and online will save the word part of it, but we'll lose that animacy in our languages
Mm.
if we don't do something right now.
Yeah. And this is where, as people have talked about this, like I said, that's not my, even though I'm leading, this is not my call. This is First Nations communities. And part of it is even understanding the implications of this, right? Both for good and bad. And there's certainly potential, but like you said, what's the cost of that? And again, it's not an easy answer, but I think it's one, to your point, that probably has to be figured out sooner than later. This is time to figure out what this is going to look like. So I'm excited about how it could support, but also very concerned that it could do more damage than good. And so navigating, that's a challenge. But anyways, we'll leave that for another topic. So I just, again, as I think about, you've got a couple kids and you see the youth growing up and you want to continue this legacy, if you will. Like when you see a young person in their 20s or whatever, and maybe you see a little of them, yourself in them, like maybe it's like you admit, what advice do you give to those people at that age in terms of like, how might they continue on a legacy of leadership, not just in First Nations and Métis communities, but generally speaking? So what advice do you give them? I'm sure it's going to lead into a lot of the things that you learned about, but like, especially those young people that are considering a life in leadership.
A great question. I get these conversations with Indigenous and non-Indigenous 20-year-olds consistently, and I really enjoy this conversation. I always like to just begin with telling them you got a brain and you got a heart, and you got to make sure that they somewhat work together, because truth comes from here, strategy and reconciliation come from the heart. And so you got to strengthen the tools up here. You don't necessarily have to chase an undergraduate degree or a master's or PhD, but you got to be able to continuously be learning. If it's in the trades, if it's of experience, if it's travel, just don't stay status quo. You got to always enhance yourself. Secondly, I like to tell them they got to calm themselves down here a little bit. Today's social media takes too much space in the brain now. It's so easy to sit there and just scroll, and if you don't like it, you can go to the next one. We have too much immediate gratification right now, meaning that if you're not satisfied by someone talking to you in 10 seconds, you get bored and you want to squirrel, look somewhere else. And that really throws off a baby boomer or Generation X, because we were raised, and I was raised by baby boomers, so I'm not one, but I can really understand. We have a lot of patience and we value every conversation. And so I tell young people today, don't let your phone consume who you can become as a leader. You have to be able to calm your brain down and understand to stay in the moment. Don't let your subconscious take you. So that's mentally what I really talk about. And I talk about it in very detail with them, but in their kind of terms. Secondly, I teach them to understand that you have to have a coming of age. You cannot just jump to leadership. You're not just an automatic leader. It's one day at a time. Like I dedicated myself in 2003 as a young person, 21-year-old at the time. And I said, I want to do some great things in life. And from that moment in 2003 to 2026, I've built myself one day at a time. I smiled at every person I could. I shook every person's hand that I could. I left everybody with a good impression. I have one enemy in my life, and it's my own thoughts. And I tell you this, build yourself one day at a time. And you'd be amazed at that person you smiled at 15 years ago. When you come into contact with them again, they will remember you or something like that. And I tell them to speak up. If someone is in a hockey dressing room and you feel they're being picked on, or if you feel that humor is mean, say something. You don't have to be the solution and the hero, but go sit by the person and just say, I don't share that thought. I'm sorry if I didn't speak up at that moment. I'm not one to say something so bluntly, but just look at me and know that I understand and I'm not here to do that. Like little leadership things like that carry a long ways.
Yeah. I want to go back just when you talked about talking to young people and social media and that. I'd love to hear from your perspective as a parent specifically, because I think lots of parents struggle with this as they're trying to get their kid. You and I both share the joys of boredom as kids, right? There's nothing to do. Well, you go figure it out, and all the trouble that you got into, but all the good trouble I would say that you got into in that moment really shape a lot of who we are. So what do you do with your own kids who are living in 2026 and have all of the challenges? So again, I'm not trying to set you as some sort of the parent of the year, although you may be, but I'm sure there's things that you are trying to do as a parent to make sure that your kids have the experiences and live the life that is best for them. So let's give us a few parenting tips or things that you're trying to do at the moment.
All right. I got to tell you about how I was raised first. I was raised by a baby boomer dad who, if you're holding the flashlight while he's doing something in the hood, that there wasn't always colorful words that came up. So I learned at a young age, just take it with stride and don't take it so personal if someone is giving you directed. So I laugh today because I have a 5, 7, and 9-year-old, and my wife and I are blessed to such great kids, and they they love Roblox as many kids do today. It's a video game on the
Sure.
iPad and so forth, but we really make sure that we focus here mentally. And they go to great schools in Regina here. That's where I am right now. We're trying Regina this year. I still live on a reserve, but we're in Regina at this time. And no iPads during the week. School time, if there's a little bit of TV time, it's documentaries only. And they have a little bit of challenge in debating with us. I try to keep them active as possible, sports, hobbies, so forth. My wife and I, just in full disclosure, we've adopted our children and they were raised and born. They were born with some challenges, addictions, and so forth. We're understanding what ADHD is right now, ADD, and all these. I grew up when no one was diagnosed. You just went with it. And just so, all these diagnoses are really important to understand. But my wife and I have a really good parenting that the brain is so powerful. If you can teach a child to just find their sweet spot and know that's what it is and just get that moment and just show them what they're talented at. My 7-year-old he's our most energetic in the room. So I know in the morning he's going to set the tone and we make sure we give him full to run around the house. My 5-year-old, he's the storyteller. My 9-year-old daughter, she's the one that if she's not liking the moment, leave her alone. And I'm not saying my wife and I are perfect parents. We do our best to try find their sweet spots, work with the teachers very well. Teachers and us have a really good conversation, emailing, texting, just stuff like that. Not to get too personal, but just to understand if I want to make sure the tone at home is similar to the tone at school and vice versa. And yeah, it's a lot of fun. I raised that one child during COVID, my 5-year-old. So he has a little bit of privilege today, meaning that my wife and I just put a iPad in his face when we were working from home through all those years. We just, okay, I'm working on a computer. Here's an iPad. So now that he's in kindergarten right now, and I told the teacher, I'm like, my child has a little privilege attitude. So if he doesn't like something, he's going to go do his own thing. We have to break him of this. Like we were participating in that because we didn't know at the time. So it's even acknowledging your own faults as a parent, maybe not a fault, but an error.
Sure.
And how
Yeah.
do you strengthen that? But that relationship between school and home is so important. And I do want to recognize anybody listening, the ratio to teachers and resources to students in some of our schools numbers are so high, it's tough to do that. But as a parent, I go above and beyond to make sure that each of my kids' teachers can call me, text me, you're not complaining, I'm not gonna side with my child. Tell me, and I will do my best to try and accommodate our relationship.
No, definitely powerful. Appreciate that response. That's great. Okay, last question. Then we're going to get into the sort of little less detailed, fun questions, as I'll call them, whatever. So you got to pick one person. And again, people hate this question when I ask them because they say, I can't name one person. All right. Today I'm telling you, you got to pick one. And it could be somebody like super random that maybe you hadn't thought about. It just came to mind.
Mhm.
Again, we get it. Mom, dad, all these people have been a big part of your life, but pick one person. And I hope that person is somehow maybe more directly tied to education
Yeah.
that you're grateful for, that you just think, yeah, I'm going to call out this particular person. And even better if they might actually be listening to this and hear their name shouted out. It doesn't have to be, but
For sure.
there's the criteria.
There's a lot of people. And so I'll split it up to three, but I'm going to make it really quick. Of course, I got to start at my kitchen table. My mother, at the age of 45, and my mother had me when she was 36, so I was the last of the baby, I guess you call it, in my home with my parents. She went back to school. She went back to university at the age of 45 and became a teacher at the age of 49. And so she showed my kitchen table that we get undergraduate degrees now. And my home changed after that, like
Wow.
financially. And I watched my mom do her correcting at the kitchen table in the evenings. She took it very serious with her duetang and her agenda and schedule. And so she made it normal for me. And so when I got to university, I was like, I watched my mom do this. I can do this. And so that really helped me a lot. I had teachers both in elementary and middle and high school that made a huge difference. In junior high school, Mr. Gillis, Ron Gillis, he seen things in me that I didn't. And I was starting to hang out with people my age that didn't bring out the best in me at a very vulnerable age. And he set me straight. He told me directly as I should have heard it. And then in high school, I had teachers that just seen something in me that I didn't. But where I'm just going to end this is in university was a change maker for me. I went into university not knowing what really how powerful education was. And I was this person who had a good attitude, but I couldn't contribute to that academia conversation with tools in my brain. And I come out of there so calm, so collected that I couldn't argue with anybody because if I disagreed with you, I'm like, okay, let's just shake hands and agree to disagree. There's other things we can talk about. I came out of there so ready to understand that the greatest warrior is the one that brings peace. And I'll just leave you with one person. I really enjoy the Nelson Mandela approach to things. Like he had every right to have a chip on his shoulder in his years of imprisonment, but he came out of there understanding that he was the person to show even his enemies that we have to get past this moment, that our greatest enemy is between our ears. And so I love stories like that because I can have a chip on my shoulder. I can hold grudges, but what is that going to help us in making sure our kids and our grandkids and our nephews and nieces have a better life on this land together? And we can do that through education.
Yeah, 100%. Oh, so I lied. I got one more question, not as a question, but I just thought I didn't ask you about one hoop, and I think it might be good for people to understand what one hoop is and how people can take advantage of that particular side of your or work. So tell us a little bit about one hoop.
Yeah, thank you. So I started a company today called One Hoop Consulting Advisory Services. So we help First Nations and Métis strengthen the relationship with Canadians, but in business and in social enterprises like education. We help non-Indigenous understand what number 57 is in Truth and Reconciliation, professional development through keynote speeches, engagements, reconciliation action plans. And then we help number 92, business and reconciliation. So we understand economics is foundational. You want every child to wake up and watch their parents get ready for work sometimes during the day. That's how we're going to strengthen our province. And so we help bridge economic projects to make sure that there's Indigenous inclusion.
Great. Yeah. And again, I hope people check it out and look at that. It's the onehoop.ca. What's the
That's right. That's
URL? Oh, no. Good. All right. Now, what are, I did not, you haven't thought of this, like, top 3 golf courses in Saskatchewan. Whoa. Go.
Okay. In the South, Kenosi. I have really loved Kenosi lately. And I just want to give praise to White Bear right beside it. White Bear humbled my golf game, but Kenosi has been such a gem lately. Central, I have to go Dakota Dunes. Dakota Dunes is so nice, always in great shape.
Yeah.
And then in the north, Waskesiu. I love Evergreen and Elk Ridge, but Waskesiu is just so beautiful. I won the Lobstick there in 2011, so I got great memories up there.
Yeah.
Those would be my 3.
Okay. And so Dakota Dunes is my number 1. I played I played Riverside and Wascana and Regina, like all those ones are, but Dakota Dunes that's the most fun golf course for me. I just think it's every time I play there, it's just fun.
So
But
good. Like I live in Regina, like Deer Valley's mine in Regina. Like I'm
yeah,
a member there and I truly appreciate it. There's so many nice golf courses. It's hard to break it down to
it
top.
is. It is. So listen, I'm giving you an invitation. You come to Moose Jaw and we'll go to the Hillcrest. And have you ever played the Hillcrest in Moose Jaw?
So I play Hillcrest the middle of April because it's the first golf course open in Saskatchewan. So we usually book a tee time. So definitely take you up on it.
Oh yeah, it would be great. All right. That was good. So this is awesome. And all right, what's on your bookshelf? What are you reading? Or if you're a listener, I don't know if you like listening, what's your learning resource today? Would you share?
So I've always done non-fictional. So I'm reading a book right now called Hope. It's about universities and how to transition them. I have an economic book right now. It's the second book to indigenization from Caroline Hilton. I'm reading that right now. But during Christmas, I told my wife, I want to start reading fictional. Like I've never read a fictional book. My wife reads from these tablet books. And so she got me into fictional. Frisky ones a little bit. I gotta admit, they're definitely up there in the adult side of romance. And I tell you, I can power through an 800-page fictional book in 2 evenings or 3 evenings, pending what my kids are doing in front of me. And I sit in airplanes a lot. I will sit there and power through. So the fictional have definitely grabbed me in the last 2 months, which I really enjoy. It allows me to just go into these other parts of my brain that I really enjoy.
So there's actually, so my daughters get after me all the time because I'm like you. I only read nonfiction. I say,
Mhm.
Dad, you got to read. It's not even good for your brain. You got to read fiction. You got to. So anyway, last year I started a little bit. My wife got me a book of short stories. So I do have to get, I know it's part of my mental health. I got to get into fiction. So congratulations on discovering. This is a male problem. I think males tend to be a little bit more into nonfiction and have a hard time getting it. But anyway, good for you.
And sorry, I was gonna add one more. So I do Audible too. So
Yeah.
I do right now I'm doing Joe Dispenza, the Evolving the Brain. And that's my 3rd time listening to it in 2 years.
Oh, wow.
And so that one I don't read, I just listen to if I'm
Yeah.
somewhere and I just put an AirPod in my ear. But I just wanted to add that in there as well.
Okay. So what's it called? Because that sounds like it might be worth,
Yeah, Evolving
you
the
know.
Brain is the title, and the author's Joe Dispenza, and he
Okay.
breaks down the brain. And it's so interesting because he talks about the 3 different sides of your brain, but also just how humans have evolved using our brains today. And it really allows me to calm down and understand which part of my brain I'm using when I'm triggered, to when I'm calm, to when I'm happy.
Yeah, sounds like one I should take up. All right. What about just watching, binge watching? Maybe it's you and your wife. You're just, and guilty pleasures. It can be, you already mentioned you read trashy books. So what? I don't want to say trashy, but so give us your binge watching favorites. Could be movies, could be series, whatever.
My all-time is Game of Thrones. I've
Okay.
watched it twice in my life. I got introduced to it in 2017 when I was a chief. I was so addicted the first time that I think House's progress slowed down a little bit. I remember going home one time for lunch and I'm like, I'll watch 1 episode. And I got a text at 1:40. They're like, Chief, we need you at this meeting. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm on my 3rd episode at lunchtime here. And so I watched it again during COVID. So definitely it's about leadership. It's like about everybody wants leadership, but they don't realize when you get there what it actually means. That's what it really intrigued me. My wife watches shows. I'm not much of a TV watcher. Like we watched Landman not too long ago.
Okay, yeah.
Definitely watched Yellowstone. It's more my wife and I's time. Like we just
Sure.
watch. So I'm not much of a TV watcher, but my wife says, let's watch this. That's our time.
Right. Yeah, that's right. All right. So now I don't know if you're going to pick, by the way, speaking of golf and Kawasis, I played Last Mountain Lake 30 years ago, 20 years ago. I don't even know. What's the status of that
So it's called
place?
Last Oak. I know there's a Last Mountain.
Last Oak. Sorry, Last Oak. And it is Last Oak. I had played it.
So Last Oak was created in 1968. In 2026, it's still 18 holes, grass greens, beautiful, tucked in this little valley right beside Crooked Lake on the Cowes First Nation.
Yes.
It is definitely can use some improvements for quality of greens, but the scenery, the whole layouts still
Yes.
today.
That's what I remember. I thought this is an interesting layout. And even at the time, I can't remember if I thought, I could use a little tender love and care, but at any rate. So my last question is, and it could be, I don't know if you want to talk about Regina, Broadview, your all of the area that Kawas is in. Give us a place that visitors should check out. If you were to say, hey, you should go check this out, it can be anything from a restaurant, it could be a park, it could be whatever, any place that you would say, this is a good place for people to check out that they might not maybe normally see or easily find.
I'll start in Saskatoon. I always like Wanuskewin. I just want to mention that. It's a beautiful area. It has a nice walk park around it as well, but the inside just really talks about the history of Saskatchewan. In southern Saskatchewan, I'm just trying to think. I definitely, if you ever have a chance to attend a powwow in a First Nation community, you don't need an invite. You are invited. If you see a powwow in White Bear, if you're around Carlisle, if you see one in Niconeat and you're around Maple Creek, get your family and go. It's such an experience. Please, you're going to see some unhealthy food. Be ready to eat a nice Indian taco. You're going to find a place on the bench. You're not being disrespectful. And then find someone if you have a question that looks like they're willing to have a conversation. And I'm not saying people are not, but if you have a question about the colors and stuff like that, but please attend a powwow. If you haven't yet, you are invited.
Thank you for that invitation. That's beautiful. Listen, Cadmus, I'm so grateful for your time. And again, just on behalf of our province and our country, thank you for your leadership. This is something we really value. And I think you are indeed the kind of person that's going to continue to accelerate truth and reconciliation. But again, beyond that, just good to get to know you. And I really do hope one day we'll get to play a little golf together.
Sounds good. Thank you for the opportunity, and thank you for everybody who took the time to listen to me.